Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Deborah Evans, LLG's Chief Executive, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hi, everyone.
Now, last week, LLG held a roundtable specifically for our Silex members on the impact of the Mazur case. We're collating case studies and considering the position of our members in light of the judgment. We've met initially with the Legal Services Board and are meeting with regulators to determine what might need to change. We're also open to the instruction of counsel to understand more fully the subtlety of the case in a local authority context, but I'm just finalising what that instruction might look like. Now, if you're willing to contribute to further roundtables or are able to provide case studies, then please do get in touch. Meanwhile, the Law Society have issued a practice note, which is linked in the bulletin from last week. Now, Dennis, let's take a walk through some of the highlights from last week's bulletin and the Senate update.
Indeed. Well, first of all, planning is in the news. It's in the news a lot at the moment because of the government's plan for change and because of the upcoming budget. Government is determined to remove what it sees as the things that block economic prosperity. Ministers will now be handed new powers to prevent councils from rejecting planning applications as part of further changes to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill aimed at accelerating house building. Under existing rules, ministers can only issue holding directions on planning applications when councils are set to approve those applications.
However, the latest proposed amendments would allow ministers to issue these holds to prevent applications being refused by local councils while they consider using call-in powers to decide whether or not they should be approved. Now, government said these changes to the bill, which is about to enter the report stage in the House of Lords, after having passed through the Commons, would tackle instances in which councils are dragging their feet. The plans also propose to prevent planning permissions for approved major housing schemes from being timed out due to lengthy judicial reviews.
And other proposals would see faster approvals for large housing schemes, reservoir applications and clean energy projects, including onshore wind farms. Natural England will also be given greater freedom over when to provide advice to local authorities, allowing it to focus on higher priority planning applications and nature recovery, the government said.
Now, Housing Secretary Steve Reed said Britain's potential has been shackled by governments being unwilling to overhaul the stubborn planning system that has erected barriers to building at every turn. It's simply not true that nature has to lose for economic growth to succeed. Going on, he said, sluggish planning has a real-world consequence. Every new house blocked deprives a family of a home. Every infrastructure project that gets delayed blocks someone from a much-needed job. This will now end.
And the Secretary of State, who took over from Angela Rayner last month, added, the changes we're making will strengthen the seismic shift already underway through our landmark bill. We will, he said, build, baby, build, with 1.5 million new homes and communities that working people desperately want and need. The amendments have been met with pushback from countryside charity, the CPRE, which raises concerns about the removal of vital legal safeguards. CPRE Chief Executive Roger Mortlock said, these 11th hour amendments to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill represent a dangerous erosion of democracy. They are an astounding capitulation to the same big developers that have consistently failed to deliver the homes that people need. And he also went on to criticise plans to hand ministers more powers to call in planning applications, claiming that they strip communities of their voice in decisions that affect their areas.
Now, sticking with housing, the government has published updated guidance to help social landlords understand and navigate their responsibilities in relation to Awaabs Law. Now, this is non-statutory guidance and relates to the hazards in social housing, Prescribed Requirements England Regs 2025, commonly referred to as Awaabs Law, and it is intended to be a guide to implementation. The regulations themselves set out the requirements which apply from Monday, the 27th of October 2025. Now, the guidance has been updated following feedback received since publication of a draft version back in June 2025.
Now, social landlords will have to address within fixed timeframes all emergency hazards and all damp and mould hazards that present a significant risk of harm to tenants. There is to be a phased implementation. In 2026, the government will extend the regulations to include the following hazards where they present a significant risk of harm. Now, these are excess cold and excess heat, falls associated baths, etc., on level surfaces, on stairs between levels, structural collapse and explosions, fire and electrical hazards, and finally domestic and personal hygiene and food safety. And in 2027, the government will again extend the regulations to all remaining safety rating hazards, apart from overcrowding, where they present a significant risk of harm.
Well, social landlords are being told to ensure they're preparing for the future expansion of Awaabs Law. Now, this guidance in force now includes information in relation to damp and mould hazards that are in scope for the first phase of Awaabs Law and will be updated to include other hazards ahead of the coming into force of further phases. Now, the government have been really clear that this phased approach does not mean that social landlords have leeway on addressing dangerous issues in their homes in the meantime. Social landlords are told to continue to meet their legal duties to keep homes safe by fixing disrepair and keeping their homes fit for human habitation and free of dangerous Category 1 health or safety hazards, as well as meeting the outcomes set by the regulator of social housing in its safety and quality standard. Now let's turn to other news. Cyber risk is a growing problem, isn't it, Dennis?
Well, indeed it is, and the National Audit Office, the NAO, has published a guide for government bodies for monitoring cyber risks. It has come as the National Cyber Security Centre has published its annual review with a warning that cyber threats against the UK are escalating sharply. The new guide has been designed for audit and risk assurance committees and non-executive directors and can support scrutiny and challenge by helping them to raise key questions for reducing cyber risk.
Now, its introduction says, despite improvements in coordination, we found departments still struggle to understand the roles and responsibilities of cyber organisations within the government. There are also inadequate measures to assess the effectiveness of efforts to bolster cyber security. Now, the guide draws from government cyber security guidelines and includes a series of questions on strategy, assurance and oversight, risk management, people and incident planning, with signposts to explore an organisation's legacy systems, how it uses the GovAssure service, and how it is applying the principle of secure by design.
And it also includes an explanation of how government policy in the area has changed. And on questions and accountability, the NAO emphasised that effective oversight does not require deep technical expertise, and that what really matters is asking the right questions, encouraging accountability, and ensuring they work effectively with senior leaders and technical teams.
Now, the NCSC review says that in the 12 months to August 2025, the organisation dealt with 204 nationally significant cyber attacks against the UK, compared with just 89 the previous year. And I'm sure many of them you'll be familiar with as listeners. Of a total of 429 incidents handled, 18 were categorised as highly significant, meaning that they had the potential to have a serious impact on essential services. In my case, the ability to shop at Marks and Spencer's. This marked an increase almost 50% on the previous year and an increase for the third year running.
And a substantial proportion of all incidents handled by the NCSC last year were linked to what are known as advanced persistent threat actors, either nation-state actors or highly capable criminal groups.
Now, growing exposure. Dr. Richard Horne, Chief Executive of the NCSC, said, "Our collective exposure to serious impacts is growing at an alarming pace. The best way to defend against these attacks is for organisations to make themselves as hard a target as possible. That demands urgency from every business leader. Hesitation is a vulnerability, and the future of their business depends on the action they take today. The time to act is now." So now let's turn our attention to colleagues in Wales. Now, we've recently had some very nice feedback on your Welsh Bulletin, Dennis.
Nice to
And
hear it.
last week, the Welsh Government published an open consultation on changes to local government elections and the rules about those in Wales. So the consultation is specifically seeking views on the draft Local Elections Wales Amendment Rules 2026 and the draft Representation of the People Act 1983, Security Expenses Exclusion Amendment Wales Order 2026. Now, Helen puts this stuff in the podcast just to make me say all these really hard words in a row. Dennis.
My turn now. The rules for the running of local elections in Wales are set out in the Local Elections Principal Areas Wales Rules 2021 for county and county borough councils and the Local Elections Communities Wales Rules 2021 for town and community councils. Helpfully, collectively, all of these are referred to as the 2021 rules. Now, the 2021 rules were fully redrafted and modernised in, well, you've guessed it, 2021, but they were updated further in 2023 to enable elections under the single transferable vote system, in the event that any principal council might wish to adopt that system under powers in the Local Government and Elections Wales Act.
And just for the avoidance of doubt, it is currently 2025. The result of those recent changes are that the 2021 rules are not being proposed for further amendment, aside for some largely technical changes or those required to take account of changes to policy and other legislation. Now, the main changes proposed relate to updating the 2021 rules to ensure they are bilingual and that they reflect recent changes made to the Senedd election rules contained in the Senedd Cymru Representation of the People Order 2025.
For elections to the Senate, changes were made to ensure that reasonable expenses can be incurred to provide for the personal security of candidates and for the protection of property. Now, that is interesting because of the continued concern generally around intimidation in public life. And a separate piece of legislation is required to bring campaign expenditure in local government elections in Wales in line with recent changes made for the Senate elections. And again, an interesting and proactive approach is being taken there.
Now, I will just highlight here an interesting paper by Stephen Clear, who's a lecturer in constitutional and administrative law at Bangor University, and he's commented more broadly on Wales's democratic reforms. Now, the article focuses predominantly on Senedd changes, but it underscores the importance of aligning electoral frameworks with modern democratic expectations. Now, these obviously include transparency, proportionality, and accessibility. And these principles are likely to influence responses to the consultation, which closes on the 12th of January 2026. Now, progression in the law, Dennis.
Well, yes, I think so, and I fully support this. It's long overdue. Campaigners have toasted the official disappearance of an anachronism from legal correspondence. Law Society guidance on diversity and inclusion language was altered this month to ask members to stop using the words "Dear Sirs" at the start of letters and emails. The phrase has been a staple of legal correspondence for hundreds of years and refers back to a time when the profession was entirely male.
But after its continued use was called out by equality campaigners, the Society issued new guidance saying this vocabulary is not inclusive. The Society said, this gendered greeting perpetuates the assumption that the recipients of correspondence are by default men. This is no longer accurate, representative, or appropriate in today's diverse society, where we want to account for and represent the broad scope of recipients, including women and individuals with other gender identities, such as non-binary. Now, if they do not know the identity of the recipient, members are encouraged to use neutral terms such as dear legal team, dear all, or simply greetings or good morning. Now, this guide, oh, sorry.
It's a lot better, isn't it?
I think so. I do my emails. I tend to address them if it's people I largely know as hi, which is particularly casual, I guess. But if you don't know the person, then good morning, greetings is quite a nice way to start, I think.
Yes, Hooray for this. And the guidance adds these alternatives maintain professionalism while ensuring that your communication is respective of all gender identities. If you know the person's name, always use it. If not, keep it simple and neutral rather than overly formal. Ellie Rees, founder and director at estate agency Brickworks, had flagged up the outdated term on national radio and worked with the Law Society and the Solicitors Regulation Authority to get the new guidance in place. Rees said, "Finally, the wording means that women are seen and heard in legal correspondence and the workplace."
Now, her fellow campaigner, solicitor and Hive Risk Chief Executive Kate Burt, added, "The Law Society's guidance is a welcome step towards closing the gender authority gap and building a more inclusive, representative profession." Now, turning to our final item of the podcast, at a frequent topic matter on the podcast, reorganisation and devolution. Now, taken from the LGA Bulletin, the LGA have made a submission to the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill at the committee stage, and it makes a number of asks.
Yes, Deborah, and interestingly, it asks the government to retain the committee structure, stating that currently 38 councils have chosen to operate a committee governance system either through a referendum or council decision, and also it asks that these democratic decisions should not be disregarded. Further to this, the LGA states that all councils currently have the option to move to a committee system if they and their communities feel that it would be beneficial for local decision making. The LGA want this flexibility in local governance to be preserved for future authorities.
Well, people like choice at the end of the day. I was in a round table last week, and a number of councillors said that they feel more involved in a committee system. So I would imagine that's one of the reasons that they've made that submission. So on standards and conditions, the LGA submit that current standards regime is not fit for purpose. Now, here we all wholeheartedly agree at LLG that it's not fit for purpose. The LGA has made the point that the government has committed to reforming the system, as well as other changes, such as introducing remote attendance for councillors and legislating to protect councillors' home addresses from publication, and that these reforms should be incorporated into the bill to ensure that new authorities are established with these protections and powers in place from the outset. Well, that would be good, wouldn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Now, the LGA also said that in addition, commissioners should be explicitly in scope of anticipated reforms to the standards regime for local authorities, creating a common standard of conduct and behaviour for all those in public life in local and regional government.
And one other submission that caught my eye was concerning audit. Here, the LGA states that the provision requiring local authorities to have an audit committee, and for that committee to have at least one independent member, must be handled carefully. The LGA say that the government must issue statutory guidance on what constitutes independent, including the appropriate skill requirements, remuneration levels, and also provide a solution for those authorities who are unable to recruit suitable candidates locally, potentially perhaps through a national pool.
Indeed. And I noted the LGA also called for expansion of the devolution framework to include more detail on the competency surrounding environment and climate change, and inclusion of a competency on culture, tourism and creative industries, which I thought was most interesting. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on the items discussed today and many, many more besides by going to bulletin number 36, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Goodbye now.
And thank you for listening, and have a good week.